Hi again then guys, and welcome to a returning episode actually from a series which we haven't covered in quite some time, Rivals on Gran Turismo. And in this particular showdown, you could say, it's between two cars which are both in the exact same category, and they're even in the exact same dealership, the Gran Turismo dealership, or the Polyphony dealership within the Asian area. Now, both of these cars are SEMA custom show cars, based, of course, on existing models. One of them you could say more than the other, but both to some degree, and they are the CHC Nova versus the Mach 40 Mustang. Two muscle-based custom show cars with two very different approaches to their tuning. The Nova is much more traditional, whereas the Mach 40 is much more of a pure, total ground-up custom. They both have similar specs in some ways, certainly when they're stock, same price, similar category, similar kind of power. So of course the question is, which one is better? And that's what we're here to find out. Now first of all, we'll break down either car on its own in kind of a mini review of its good points, maybe not so good points, and then as we always do, we'll put them head to head in a top trump style, biggest is best showdown. So first of all, let's take a look at the Nova. Now, the CHC Nova is a car which I was very excited to see introduced into the game, but not because I necessarily love the car itself. I am a fan of the Nova, especially around 66, but it was more than that to me, in a similar way to how when the Cobra was first added as the first DLC download classic, it was what the car represented, this idea of bringing back kind of the old ways of Gran Turismo, including classics once again, or including on this occasion show cars like the Buick Special, various others that have been around in the past due to the Gran Turismo Awards. I believe the HPA Golf was also included under that guise as well. Now, this particular car, as I said just now, is the much more traditional approach of the two, at least in comparison to how extreme the other car is. It is still, at its core, a muscle car, very much so. It's got an updated engine, updated drivetrain, but also the classic vibe to its appearance. Now, when you fully tune this car, you're looking at an incredible amount of power. Basically 1,000 horses, 990 to be exact, but the disadvantage of the car is that regardless of if you have the most power or if you reduce it right down, the essential core concept of the vehicle is still a muscle car. And although that's not bad in its own right, Gran Turismo Sport just isn't really a game where muscle cars are put to their best use, because most of the advantages that you use them for, such as lower class racing for instance, where you can leave the power standard but drop the weight and improve the cornering immeasurably, such as you could do on previous Gran Turismo games to great effect, that doesn't really apply anymore because of stuff like balance of performance, where the car is just automatically configured, or at least, of course, for the most part. Now, on this occasion, it's still a great car. It's not super beginner friendly, it's very tail happy, it likes to shred its tyres a lot, especially when tuned, but of course that leaves us with comparing it to the Mach 40 Mustang. Now, to say that this one is a Mustang is kind of an overstatement, because as the name suggests, the Mach 40 is a combination of Mach 1 Mustang and Ford GT40, two of the most iconic Fords ever built. And although the combination doesn't necessarily sound like the most obvious thing in the world, I actually think they work really well together, and I discussed that in my specific review for the Mach 40. It's a great drifter, the fact that it's mid-engine instead of front-engine gives it a completely different driving style to what you typically expect from not just a muscle car, but from a Mustang specifically as well. Now, in terms of power, it's similar to the other one. It's not quite as high, but it's still well over 900, so well beyond most supercars, in fact. Again, the price is 300 grand. It was the winner, of course, of the same Gran Turismo award, so it's cool to have it in the game from that point of view. As far as track performance goes, though, I definitely prefer this one of the two, although the Nova is the more obvious choice for drag racing, for a number of reasons that we'll see in just a second when we look at the specs. This one is definitely my preferred of the two for track racing. The Nova is decent enough for the lower categories, but once you get it into the super high amounts of power and torque, you can really feel that. It gets very fishtaily, even on racing tyres. It's a pure old school car at heart. Whereas the Mach 40, it kind of isn't. It is in a sense, but not really. It just feels like a supercar with a Mustang body, which is kind of what it is. So around the track, it feels much more modern, much more at home. Not to say that it doesn't like to drift, for sure it does, but the Nova feels more at home with less power, say around N400 or N500, that's where you can get the best out of it, whereas with the Mach 40, I would say more around N600 or N700, it feels really at home, that supercar level, which makes sense, again. So as far as the track performance on both, I definitely prefer the Mach 40. For drag racing, I'd probably put my money on the Nova though. It's got more power, more torque, it's lighter as well. But speaking of all of those things, let's actually break it down and see which one is indeed better. Well, as you'll have doubtless noticed from the lap times, the Mach 40, despite having less power, was actually quicker. A 139 lap to the 141, in fact, of the Nova, so an interesting difference. But what about on paper? Well, this is actually a match that, to be fully transparent about it, didn't go in the way that I thought it would. I thought that the Mach 40 was going to actually be fairly similar across the board to the Nova, but that's not really the way it worked out. Now, the first thing is the price, and in that regard, they are very well matched. They're both 300 grand. So as we usually do, we'll give them both a point for that. From there on though, spoiler alert, the Nova is a dominating force because as you can see from the numbers, it literally sweeps the board compared to the Mach 40. Now as far as classes, the Mach can go to N600 and then all the way up to N1000. That's its full range. The Nova has the advantage on that. It can go down to N500. Now you're probably wondering, why is a lower category an advantage? Well, basically because it means that for an N-class car, that simply allows it to run in more categories. And that can make a huge difference. For instance, in the Blue Moon Bay Oval event, where you can earn hundreds of thousands of credits, that is worth more money by simply dropping it a class. So it's a pretty significant advantage. As far as engine size, well, of course, engine size isn't everything, as we've said a number of times, but top trump style, just for the fun of it, biggest is best, all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to see this is actually more a case of Corvette versus Ford GT, you could say, rather than Nova versus Mustang, but the 6.2 litre of the Nova is enough to beat out the 5.4 litre of the Mach 40. As far as power, though, they are, of course, both great. In fact, they're both over 900, but the Nova is the better of the two. It's got 990 to the 937 of the Mach 40. That's not bad. 937 horsepower is more than a Koenigsegg, so yeah, that's not bad at all. As far as torque, again, the Nova has the advantage, but not by as much of a margin. It's only 8 pound-feet. So close for the Mach 40 to get a point, but unfortunately not close enough. And as far as weight, I mean, look at the numbers. It's so clear-cut. They're not even close. 1,365 kilos. It's not bad as such for the Mach 40, but it's a little bit heavy, considering that is level 5, I think it was, upgraded, whatever the highest one is, to the 1188 of the Nova. That's really good. That's nice and lightweight, similar to what the Nova could have on Gran Turismo 6, even though that was, of course, a different year of Nova. And as far as horsepower per ton, well, again, it completely dominates the Mach 40 again, because not only does it have more power anyway, it's that much lighter that it makes a huge difference. 833 horsepower per ton is literally TVR speed 12 kind of levels, to the 686 of the Mach 40. Now that's not bad. That's well beyond most supercars, but still just not quite good enough. So in terms of lap time, as I did say earlier, the Mach 40 was the quicker of the two, by a decent enough margin, and it was also easier to get that quicker lap. I had to restart a couple of times with the Nova to really get a feel for how much tyre shredding was going to happen, and to rejiggle the diff a little bit. But beyond that, the Nova dominates in terms of points. It's got everything, basically, to its name, and the only one which they share is the price, where the Mach 40 has the 300 grand advantage as well. So overall, this is the definition of one of those occasions, yet again, where the car that is slower on paper is faster in practice. And you can't really get much more opposite than this, because the Mach 40 was the dominant car around the track, but the Nova is utterly dominant on paper. So it's an interesting matchup, very well matched cars in terms of how they actually perform around the track, and two very different approaches to what could initially seem to be a similar thing, but they're kind of not. They're very, very different cars, and both of them are good for different reasons. The Nova has the raw power, the raw speed, The Mach 40 is more of an exotic approach to a muscle car. I personally prefer the Mach 40, but both of them are pretty cool. But that's it for this matchup overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.